Is everybody back?
I'm back.
Okay. Okay. So going back to the top, we'll just we have defined educational institution, and here's why. We haven't actually I've had some inquiries about, I actually had one recently from a correctional institution, I believe it was Coffee Creek, who was interested in starting an electrology school in the prison. So basically expanding the definition of an educational institution just provides more flexibility to allow, cosmetology has it, and since we do get a lot of inquiries on tattooing and now one for electrology, it just makes it easier to have that flexibility. So is everybody okay with that? And that's just standard HLO language. Official transcript, we just defined, we aligned it with our other official transcript definitions, and it basically tells you what your official transcript needs to have on it. Of course, it could have different letterhead and all of that, but some specific information needs to be on there. We specifically added the practical exam as one of the items on there, and that would kind of align with the schools and the training supervisor providing that practical, so we could ensure they had that done before they get a license. I'm going to skip the approved curriculum since it's for schools. It's going to be the exact same procedures, the exact same theory hours. It's just under a school and not under supervision. So they're going to adhere to Higher Education Coordinating Commission, usually requirements and their laws and rules. And then we do give them some guidance on student-teacher ratio. So, and actually, maybe you want to weigh in on this. So on page 2, hopefully we're on the same pages. Well, you guys can see my screen. I'm sorry. So under number 5, let's start with 5. Education must be conducted by a qualified individual recognized by an educational institution. So the only thing you could add in here, which I don't know if it's necessary, is they must be licensed electrologist. So, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, I guess it's implied, but it would just be the time when we do have a school and then HEC asks me what's the requirement, and they're not going to put it in their rules, they're going to put it in ours. So I think that's valid. In any other school that we have, like Coffee Creek has a cosmetology program, they have all licensed people who are registered teachers. And I take that back, that are under, like, they're actually under Portland Community College, so they adhere to their requirements and they require them be licensed.
Sammy, this is Kate Kaufman. Is there a redundancy here? Like, should you be referring to the statutes of a qualified individual as defined by whatever, or?
Yeah, you could do it either way. The only thing doing defined by is then sometimes they have to go and look at what the statute is, and for people doing the practice, sometimes that can get confusing, but I can make a note and you can actually do both. Say licensed electrologist practicing under ORS 690 325, I believe it is, for that.
Sammy, could it be, I think it might be easier to understand it. Education must be conducted by a qualified licensed electrologist. because there are no educational institutions.
Cynthia, do you think that's too limiting? Would we still say recognized by and who is recognized by the educational institution? I think you need to have that in there.
Which educational
I like
institution?
that looks good.
Well, if it was at a prison, it would be a community college.
Yeah.
So the community college would ensure they're licensed, and then they wouldn't be basically saying there wouldn't be registered teachers through HEC. So there's some other type of trainer.
All right, I'm kind of against having an electrology school at the prison because of so many hours. I don't know any electrologist that's going to go to this prison.
So they would be prisoners. They
What?
wouldn't come. They would be prisoners who are at the school, not people going into the prison to get trained. They would be prisoners at the school.
I understand, but the supervisors would have to go to the school.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough electrologists just to do the general public. I think we're going to have a problem getting supervisors, because if you're an a licensed electrologist, right now you're busy, and to
Right.
give up 300 hours of your time to go down to the school, I don't know if that's going to be practical.
But that would be an electrologist option.
All right.
I mean, if she wanted to do that, and that's what she wanted to make her profession, and Portland Community College was going to pay her, that's her. We don't want to be limiting.
right.
And that's what this does, is it allows. Not that, I mean, I literally just had an inquiry about this for electrology in a prison. So usually it's about tattooing. I mean, having tattooing in prison, but so it's just not limiting, and it would be up to the practitioner to decide if that's something that they wanted to do. So make sure they're licensed and that they're recognized by whichever educational institution they're from. I think that gets us there. Sheila?
Am I, let's see, am I muted or not?
No, I can hear you.
Okay. I think the number 5 maybe should be broken up, that the education must be conducted by a qualified licensed electrologist, which could mean and refer to a trainer, and put an or a recognized educational institution if the person was going to an already established school.
What do you mean by trainer? Supervisor?
Supervisor, yeah,
There's
right.
a whole nother rule for that.
Yeah,
So this
Okay.
is just schools. 007 is just about training and supervisors.
okay. Never mind.
So okay. Okay, I think that's it.
Ratio.
For ratio.
Since we wanted to talk about the ratio.
Well, I'm getting there.
Sorry.
So the student to teacher ratio while performing procedures is 4 students to 1 teacher.
This
So-
is Kate Kaufman. I was curious about that because your curriculum has statements that they have to be directly supervised in their 46 procedures and the 20 procedures for galvanized. In that respect, doesn't it mean that it has to be a 1-to-1 for those, but then during the 230, when it's indirect supervision, it can be the 4-to-1 ratio?
No, because direct supervision is defined as, what would you guys define it as? Immediately accessible, and what was it? Immediately accessible and in view. So you could be immediately accessible to 4 people and in view of 4 people. Unless you guys wanted it to be more specific, we could definitely write it that way.
Do you work on 4 clients in the same room or have open doors between clients?
Lacey, you're muted.
This is Lacey Keeney. Yeah, you could do that. I mean, like most schools do that. They'll have several beds side by side. The way I've actually started setting up my facility to be able to start doing training, and I have 2 rooms that are together where there's an open door where I can either go in and out of one of the others or indirectly supervise both situations easily, with that in mind. So but most schools, like this, I taught in California. I went down to California to AIE. It's one of the top schools around, and we have multitudes of students in beds with 1 to 2 instructors there supervising, up to like 12 different patients at one time in there. For let's say private work, they'll have a curtain that comes around so they can block off like you would like in a like kind of like a emergency room, the curtain that pulls around so they could segregate that bed from the others to do private things like chests or different things. But you're still within hailing distance of the instructor, and the instructor will come in and out. As an instructor, you can watch more than 1 bed at a time, even if you're able to stand between 2, small cubicle rooms and observe. So most schools do it that way. And so even in a supervisor apprenticeship type situation that we're in, like this, what we're talking about too, it could be the same way too, where you can, as long as you're there to observe and you can get to them immediately and within hailing distance, it should not be an issue or a problem.
Thank you.
Sammy, you're muted.
Carla, do you have a comment? Sorry about that.
I think we're facing a chicken and egg problem because we don't have enough electrologists, but we don't have enough people to train the new ones either. And I think we need to find a way around, even if it's only a temporary solution. Maybe allowing people to be instructors from out of state that have more experience, that are willing to come here and teach. But if we don't have enough people who are able and willing to be instructors, we can never fix the underlying problem. So that's my 2 cents.
Sheila, do you have another question, statement? Your hand's up. Jamie?
To answer your question, the reason the school in Oregon closed is there wasn't enough students. We're trying to make it so that people that want to become electrologists can go to a supervisor or an electrologist without going to a school. Yes, it's a chicken or egg problem. I have sent, unfortunately, quite a few people down to California because we're reciprocal with them, just to answer your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lacey?
Lacey Keeney, I'd like to make a comment to that too. There are electrologists willing to teach currently, and some of us are currently setting up, in light of this, hoping that this does go through so we can start teaching people and start, because I know like with my current facility and practice, I could definitely use people. I mean, I have jobs basically waiting once people get licensed. So this is a good thing. And I know Jamie's the same way. Jamie's got I believe, an empty space in her office as well. I'm not speaking for her, but I think she does. And she's looking for some people there also. So there are those of us who are willing to teach. We just want to make sure that they're taught correctly, they're taught right, and that we keep safety at the top of our priority and we protect our craft too.
Okay, let's go back. Okay, so did we land on, are we okay with the 4-to-1 student teacher ratio? I mean, we're still saying they have to be immediately accessible and they have to be, it has to be in view, which could be on screen, but immediately accessible. It just adds some flexibility. I don't know that would ever happen, but it does add some flexibility. And that was on the executive summary, I believe, for Basic Rights Oregon. I have it right here handy. How about if we vote on it? So leaving it student teacher ratio of 4 students to 1 teacher. Someone can make that motion.
I
I have a
motion.
question about that. So really quick.
Excuse me?
I have a quick question on that,
Okay.
on that. So that's 4-to-1. So I know that when a person applies for their student license and temporary license, and then you guys qualify the instructor or supervisor for that, does that limit the instructor to have only 4 people? Because some people may be only able to give so much time per month or per week to training. So let's say I've got 6 people that would like to be supervised by me, but 2 of them are single moms and are working a job and can only come in like on weekends and stuff like that. But I could still have others who are here more hours or working more hours towards getting their license. So I just want to make sure that when we go to the 4-to-1, that's not a minute or maximum of 4 students per instructor for a period of time. Like I can only have 4 on the books period at any given time, or can I have, let's say, 6 on my books that I'm teaching, but 4 in my facility at any specific time? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because I want to be able, if I'm supervising, I want to make it work. So if somebody's, let's say, like I said, a single mom, she's working a couple of part-time jobs to get through, I can still work with her schedule to be able to supervise her and train her and teach her and still get her license, work with her schedule. But yet, if she can't come in for, let's say, periods of time, that I can bring in somebody who can be there when she can't be there. So I'm still trying to get electrologists going and get people licensed that way. Is that, I guess that's what I'm saying.
My reading of this is that while performing procedures clarifies that it's just while electrolysis is being rendered. I don't think that statement really says anything about how many supervisees you have at any given time in your practice. And I think that's
But
good.
it's up to interpretation. And an inspector, when the inspector comes into my facility and does an inspection, a lot of times things are up to interpretation if it's not written out or spelled out correctly. So it can be depending on the enforcement person who would come in and check my books or check my paperwork and go, oh, you've got 6 or 7 people. So it is up to interpretation a little bit by somebody. And so I just wanted to be more specific on it.
An inspector wouldn't look at any of your school documentation that was outside of their regulatory authority. Heck might though, or the other educational institution. We could make it more specific. The student teacher ratio while performing practical procedures is 4 students to 1 teacher.
One time.
Does that get us there?
The
I mean, you
students,
could,
That
is
works for me.
students and one teacher at one time. Yeah,
Okay. So if we want to have a motion on that language,
Sammy, can you, is there any way we could just raise our hands instead of calling us each individually? Would that be
No.
easier? Yeah, all right, no problem.
motion.
I make a motion that we accept it as the way you wrote it.
Okay.
I'm looking for it here on the thing, but as the way you wrote it,
Well, the
The one
student to
time.
teacher ratio while performing practical
Oh,
procedures
yes.
is 4 to 1 teacher at one time.
at one time, yes.
A second.
I'll second that.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Jamie,
Yes, I agree. This is Jamie.
Sheila. Sheila,
Yes,
Lacey,
I agree.
Seth,
Yep.
Kate,
Yes.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla,
Yes,
Nancy, Amy.
Yes.
Great. Okay, the next number 7 is basically, so the way this is laid out, under number 2, A through G is, a broad stroke. So these are the broad, areas of study. And then where it talks about the office has approved the January 1, 2023 electrology curriculum content and learning objectives. So that's actually saying there's actually a more comprehensive document that you're going to be using to teach. So it's allowing us to be more vague here and then saying, oh, there's a more comprehensive document that you're actually going to be using. So that's just standard boilerplate language for HLO. And then number 8 is it gives the office the authority must obtain approval of any changes to the curriculum. So we would want to see those if you make a change. And then educational institution must obtain approval of their curriculum from the office before starting to teach. So that would, it's actually part of the getting a license through HEC. Once you apply there, they have a process, and then their process says, hey, health licensing office, can you approve this curriculum before we give them a license? So it's just making it clear for schools and HEC and HLO that that's how that's going to move forward. So moving on. So we're on 910-007. So this is a training program specifically. And so we've landed on 600 hours, and I haven't heard, is everybody okay with this? If we're okay with how it's written, then I'm not going to call for a motion. If there's actual, some, discrepancies on wanting it different, then we'll do that. So 6 hours total of theory and practical and learning objectives. The training must include 200 hours of theory instruction, which could be hybrid. And then the training, and then 400 practical experience. The 400 practical experience must include 400 practical procedures. And then this is the theory domain. So business operations, 15 hours, organ laws and rules, 20 hours, anatomy and physiology, 60 hours, microbiology, 5 hours, safe use of devices, federal regulations and standards, 10 hours, electrology service, 30 hours. Oops, electrical devices. Oh, yes. Electrolysis galvanic is 20 hours. Thermolysis, manual and flash is 20 hours. Combination of electrolysis and thermolysis blend is 20 hours. And then as part of the approved training, all theory must be completed prior to the temporary training performing procedures. So saying you gotta do all the book work before you can start performing services on clients. And then number 4 talks about the actual practical hands-on training. So of the 400 hours, so under electrolysis, 20 procedures, Thermolysis is 46 procedures. Thermolysis flash is 46 procedures, and then combination of electrolysis and thermolysis blend is 46 procedures. And then you have 230 procedures of choice that would be between the A through C that I just said, or D through I that I just said, electrolysis, thermolysis, manual, flash, and then the combination. And then something specific that the qualification committee pointed out that they wanted is that the temporary trainee must observe the supervisor demonstrating 3 of each procedure listed in A through D of the rule for a total of 12 procedures, so that the student is actually watching the trainer, the supervisor, provide these services. So they're getting a visual, and then they can start doing the procedures on their own. I guess that's a good question. On this, we don't say that the ones that they're going to observe the supervisor demonstrating is before they start hands-on. Would that be how you want it? It would seem to be, that would make most sense. Make the most sense. Tongue-tied here. Let me just put that. Yes, Jamie?
All right. While the student is watching the supervisor do these procedures, do they get credit for those procedures of watching, those hours of watching?
Yes.
All right.
I guess I have a question around adding that. Would it make it more strict in the sense that if you watched some specific procedures being done and wanted to then go hands-on in those specific ones, would this now be more limiting that you have to watch every single type of modality before being able to try one modality that you've already watched? Because
Oh, I see.
you may not have patients who are in all of those different modalities, so you may actually be limiting it because it depends on the patients who would be getting the 12 different types, if that makes sense.
Good point. Yes, Lacey?
I would like to break mine down where I do like thermolysis, where I could do the demonstrations on thermolysis and then start working with the student on thermolysis and then go to, like, let's say galvanic, demonstrate galvanic, and then have them work on that. But, you know, I would not want to have them observe all 12 procedures and then start picking ones to go out. I'd rather narrow it down to a section, work that section, and then kind of work the section. And then once they're good and proficient in all 3, you know, and then, you know, be able to have them start going too. But I really think, though, if we want to, I don't think, I think Seth is correct, is that you need to be able to show them a couple and then have them work on it. And then when they're ready, show them a couple of a different modality, have them start working on it, and then show them a couple of another modality, have them work on it. And then they can start going and taking clients as they get them, you know, or models as they get them to work on the different modalities. But not sure if that makes sense, but.
Yep.
I have a question about why there's only 20 procedures for galvanic required.
That's what the qualification committee came up with. Cerinthia is here. She was the facilitator, but Jamie, Lacey, and Sheila were also on that committee. So Jamie, if you'd like to weigh in, then you can.
Yeah, the reason that was done is basically, truthfully, I don't know of any electrologist today that uses pure galvanic, but an electrologist should know galvanic theory and how to use it. So galvanic's important to know, but it's not as important as the thermolysis and the blend method, and blend is a combination of galvanic and thermolysis. And that's why when we put together, galvanic was only at 20 hours, whereas the other two modalities had more hours, because that's what they're going to be using most of the time. But I know that Sheila does use pure galvanic too. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I am also going to be a galvanic operator since it's permanent.
All of them are permanent hair removal.
Carla, do you have something you wanted to add?
It is.
Yeah, no, yes, no. Sheila, did you have something to add?
No.
Sheila, you're muted.
I thought I unmuted. Okay. No, I think we asked to have that lowered because we don't use straight galvanic as often as the other modalities. But there needs to be some time spent with that, because there's also new equipment. There's a new machine out that is strictly galvanic. Now the multiple needle isn't as popular as it has been off and on, but it's still around. So it needs to be there, but not there. There won't be as many operators that probably choose to do that full time as they will do incorporating the other modalities in their practice. But it needs to be addressed. But straight galvanic is not used as much as the others, in case, unless a person really, I mean, there will be some people that will maybe only want to do it, but for the most part, on balance, it's just a matter of choice. Probably that's not going to be what most people are going to use, so we don't need as much time for it.
Okay, so I've added some language. The temporary trainee may begin providing practical procedures once they've observed the supervisor demonstrating 3 procedures listed in A through D of this rule. So it gives them some flexibility. If they've observed the electrolysis at galvanic, then they can start doing those procedures, and then they would still be observing the other ones. So just add some flexibility, takes any question out of it, and it's not limiting, so I think it's probably.
Can I offer the clarification of observe the supervisor demonstrating the 3 procedures they'll be using?
I like that for monkey around with it after the meeting before it goes to the board. But I understand what you mean there. I don't think we need to vote on this one since we're actually giving some flexibility and not limiting it. So number 5 is the training must be conducted by an office approved supervisor. When we get down there, 0050 is going to give us more explicit directions on what they do. So I think we can move on from that. Procedures listed in 4A through D of the rule must be performed under direct supervision, which we've already defined up above. What? Oh. Procedures listed in 4E of the rule must be performed under direct supervision, which means the supervisor is physically present and on site, but may not be in view of the procedure and must be available to provide guidance and instructions to the temporary training license holder. So since we only used indirect supervision once, we just define it in the rule. I'm trying, let's see. We need to. Is everybody okay with defining indirect supervision in that way? Or is there something you want to add, make it more flexible? It's basically it's saying you got to be somewhere in the facility, but it may not be right there. Got to be physically present and on site somewhere. Jamie?
No, I really feel that they have to be in immediate, in the immediate area. Even they're still beginners. And even though the supervisor doesn't have to be right there, they still should be in voice communication or physical communication, maybe, 10 feet away, but they have to be right there, just like we said in the other area.
You can use
So
the
then-
language immediately available as we used before.
So then would it just mean that for every procedure, it's direct supervision?
Yes.
I feel like I really appreciated the fact that there was clarification between direct and indirect. And one of the things that I'm holding is the fiscal reasonableness of starting a school. And like people who start schools have to be able to walk away and do other parts of their job. So I would like for us to keep the direct and indirect, but I'm open to the immediately available language.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and, this is what you guys decided on direct supervision. So it might be easier to look at them together. Because I want to make sure that they're different, if we're gonna use them both. So, immediately accessible, that's an in view. So how would you want indirect to be? I mean, physically present and on site means they're somewhere in the building. How do you want indirect to be different from direct? How's that?
I think
Or
the
is there no option for indirect? Kate, was that you? Amy, was that you?
I mean, I can imagine that immediately accessible means that they are right by their phone, so as soon as I get a text, I can get to that room. The in view part seems to be the change between the two types.
Lacey?
I would agree that it should be immediately accessible and within hailing distance. So, I mean, again, we're going to go back to what we said the first time, I mean, you don't have to have immediate view of them, but if they're within hailing distance or be able to get some help there immediately if they needed it.
So what would be the difference between indirect and
Right.
direct?
Thank you.
It sounds like removing the in view portion.
Yes, that was my suggestion. This Lacey Keeney, that would be the removing the in view section.
Removing it?
No.
Leaving it?
So indirect would be immediately accessible, but doesn't have to have the in view of the practical
Okay.
procedure. The other one, direct supervision, would be the in immediately accessible in view.
Okay.
So
Yes, Jamie?
In a way, I don't even think we should have it should only be direct view. There should be no indirect supervision. They can be in the next room, but they need to be able to get to the person, I would say within 20 seconds. So
that's
if
what immediately accessible would be, right?
right,
That's what you guys defined
immediately
at the front.
accessible until they graduate. You
Okay.
never know what can happen. I don't agree with indirect supervision unless, which means a super is immediately accessible. Yeah.
Okay, so we added that language and took out physically present on site. So the new definition would be procedures performed under 4E of this rule must be performed under indirect supervision, which means the supervisor is immediately accessible, but may not be in view of the procedure and must be available to provide guidance and instruction to the temporary trainee license holder. So if somebody wants to make a motion on that, would be great.
I'll make a motion to
Oh,
pass it as it's
unless
written.
did you have something you wanted to say, add to that, Seth? I'm sorry. Okay,
No, just making a motion to pass it.
in a second.
I'll second.
I'll call the roll. Jamie,
Yes.
Sheila,
Yes.
Lacey,
Yes.
Seth,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla,
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Great. You guys are moving right along here. I love it. Okay, next. So this was one that Corinthia, but the committee wanted to do. So training must be completed in no less than 6 months and no more than 1 year from the date of the office's issuance of the training license. So it can't be done within 6 months, but they can't go longer than a year.
What was the reasoning behind that?
I'm gonna let somebody else take that. Jamie, if you'd like to weigh in, and Sheila and Lacey, and maybe even Corinthia.
This is Lacey. I'll go and weigh in on that. So the reason that there was a minimum time limit is because it's going to take, 600 hours is 600 hours. That's a lot of, practical time that needs to be put into place to be able to learn your craft. So that's why there's a minimum of 6 months to make sure that, people actually spend the time and that they're not getting pushed through the process without getting the proper training and the time for the training. Now, the minimum of a year was, I believe, was kind of the maximum a year. They can renew their license with a new training license, and they keep all the training they've already had. It's just the state's way to, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, to be able to have that training license for up to a year before it's renewed. That's kind of what I got from Corinthia. I thought was that, but as far as the minimum of 6 months, that was those of us electrologists that asked for that, because we feel like that is an adequate amount of time to be able to get the entire thing done, along with the book work and the procedures, and have the time to be able to put in it and do it properly and correctly with learning the trade.
The maximum of a year does allow for a renewal, though.
Correct. That is the, yes. So, but the renewal will come from the state. I believe that you have to pay another renewal fee with the state to renew after the year, but you don't lose any of your training you had in the preceding year. It just allows you to extend your training time over a year.
I'm actually not sure it even needs to be said. I think it may add confusion. I think you just say, temporary trainee, where are we at?
The reason we did it, Sammy,
Is training must be completed in no less than 6 months. I think that gets you there. And then in the renewal, it says, it's good for, if you guys say 1 year and may be renewed, or good for 1 year and you may not be renewed, but can reapply or may not reapply. I think if it's said here, it makes it a little confusing. Jamie?
All right, I agree with you. I think training must be completed in no less than 6 months. And I think it should stop there. If somebody has been coming and they can't pass it in a year, they're not going to become an electrologist. So I think training must be completed in no less than 6 months. But my question is, if they go to an online source for the written work, is that included in the 6 months? Or is the 6 months only practical?
all of it. The whole 600.
All right, I would just delete and no more than a year from date of office.
Okay.
Yeah, because if they're not done in a year, they're not going to become an electrologist.
I agree with taking the year out of it, because it also opens up the fact that there are people who may be disabled. There may be people with financial stress that have to stop their training and come back to it. So allowing for an outside of a year is an equity piece.
Right. Or there could be another event like COVID, which would prevent students from seeing clients at all, which would halt training. So I also see many reasons, or it's simply, you know, a familial emergency that requires somebody to go and deal with something for a few months. There's a lot of reasons that I can see why somebody would need to take a break from their training and come back. So having the option to either renew their trainee license or continue training outside of a year if necessary, I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
I agree.
This is Sheila. I agree with those last comments about the extending time. I'm also wondering about the practicality of no less than 6 months, when we may have some people who are faster at the online learning or have more time to commit to that and get it finished faster, depending on how the school is set up. If they accept things as fast as you go, or if they want to have a certain increment times. But and we offer sending some of our clients that are interested maybe home with some books to read. We're loaning books out that they've already got some reading material under their belt before they start this. So I don't know if, I think it's possible someone could finish less than 6 months depending on their circumstances. So I think that's a limiting thing that I don't quite agree with, but I'd like to hear what other people say.
Carla, did you have something? Or no, Sabina, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I don't necessarily have as strong feelings about the minimum requirement, but I will just throw out there that 600 hours, if you're putting in 40 hours a week, that's 15 weeks. And whether or not people will be able to get 40 hours a week of practical hours, you know, maybe that isn't really feasible. But if you're going at it full time and putting in a full-time job's worth of work, you'll get 600 hours in 15 weeks.
Lacey?
This is Lacey. I would like to say that I think the 600 or the 6 months is needed, because as an electrologist, knowing how many hours that I work, that all of the other electrologists work. So I think people need to realize too is that as an electrologist, we're going to have to separate like our certain patients, and then we're going to have patients that realize and know that they're going to be worked on by a student. So a lot of my patients that are insurance patients and other patients aren't going to necessarily be able to be worked on by a student. That's a lot of it is also in my contracts with all of my insurance agents, is that I can't have a student working on my patients. So my plan is to be able to do classes in the evenings and also on the weekends to be able to license new students. So I know that I also have to maintain a practice. I also know that I have more patients, you know, than I can do, you know, as you know, I mean, I have a waiting list is what I'm trying to say. I will be making concessions in my schedule though, to schedule in time where I can bring in models. My students will be working on models, people who have signed a piece of paper saying, I understand that the person working on me is a student and not a licensed professional, which is something I legally have to do and is required by insurance, my malpractice insurance. So it's not something where someone's going to be able to come in during my standard work days from, let's say, 9 to 5 and be able to start working on my people that that are my patients that I'm working on, these people that our students were going to be working on are going to have to be people who understand that the person working on them is not a licensed electrologist and under the supervision of a licensed electrologist. So you have to realize that we're going to need that 6 months, because if you don't, you're asking those of us who are already electrologists to basically shift into a much lower gear, see less people, so we can be seeing and adding more student work in there. So the way I've devised my schedule is I plan on doing, I'm going to do extra. I'm going to do weekends. I'm going to do evenings. I'm going to do other times outside of my standard work schedule to be able to have time so I can commit that time one-on-one with my students to be able to do that work. So 6 months is very feasible when you think about it. You can't say, well, 40 hours a week times this many weeks equals this many hours. You have to realize those of us that are supervisors and instructors have thriving practices that we have to take care of, and we have commitments to people who have surgery dates, people who have other things, and we also have to fall into alignment with our contractual agreements with the insurance companies like the VA and our OHP people with our CCOs. All of our CCOs have clauses in there that we're not allowed to have students work on our patients. So there's going to be some issues there. And also, like I said, you have to realize too that the people that are being worked on by our students must know that that is student work and that they're being supervised, and they have to be willing to commit to allowing that student to work on them.
Right. So to Sheila's point, I think that in every training program is going to look different. Maybe if Sheila does it, she's going to have more time to commit to the student. So limiting to 6 months. And if she can do it, if somebody can do it in 4, it is limiting doing it that way. We could definitely take a vote or give another option. It is limiting to say 6 months, and you could be able to get somebody through the training program. We do have other programs that actually go that state in the rule, full-time, part-time. You could do that. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. So if somebody has, let's limit it to about a minute, since everyone's going to have their own opinion. Nicole, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was concerned about limiting the options for how long this would take. If someone can get it done in 4 months, I don't see how that's wrong. That's
and
all.
Sabina?
I would also be in favor of opening it to people completing the process in less than 6 months.
And Jamie?
I'm totally against it. I don't
Okay.
see how anybody, if they're going to go 40 hours a week, and that's 15 weeks, if it's, if it's a school where you're going 9 to 5, Monday through Saturday, yes, you can do it in less than 6 months. But maybe add training must be completed in no less than 6 months if you are going to a single supervisor. If you're going to a school, which we don't have right now, if
That's a
you're
different
going
rule.
to a school, then you can do it in
But that's
less
a
than
different
6.
rule, Jamie. Schools are a whole different rule.
All right, then if it's a trainer with a supervisor, I think it should be 6 months. There's no way somebody's going to be able to give somebody, get them done in 15 weeks. It's got to be 6 months.
Okay, Amy, do you want to go ahead and make a comment?
Yeah, I would also suggest reducing or otherwise lowering that 6 months, only because if we think outside of your individual current practices and what you can do versus what the future might hold, and these rules are supposed to be helping us reduce barriers, and there may be a future structure where there is more capacity for instructors. We're not there yet, obviously, based on what we know is happening in Oregon, but we're trying to set up these rules with a hopeful future state that could allow for that.
Yes. I think that's everybody. So we can do a couple different things. We can vote to remove the minimum altogether. We can vote to reduce it to 4 months, or we can vote. So let's do this. So let's do this. Here's going to be the motion. The training must be or just get rid of it. No minimum. So if somebody wants to get it done in 4 months, they can. And if the supervisor can accommodate that, then they can. So if somebody will make that motion.
This is Sheila. I move that we remove the 6 months minimum.
And a second.
I second. This is Kate Kaufman.
And we're going to call the roll. 6. And Jamie?
No, I disagree.
Sheila?
Yes.
Lacey?
No.
Seth?
Yes.
Kate?
Yes.
Sabina?
Yes.
Nicole?
Yes.
Carla?
No.
And Amy?
Yes.
Okay, hold on. I'm doing math here. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. With 5 to 3, the motion passes. So that will be what we take to the board, and the board can, and of course they'll get a report on all this, so they'll be able to see that there was the different opinions. So they'll
Tammy,
be able to see.
Can I just clarify, does that mean item 8 is removed altogether because we're
Yes.
recommending, okay, removing the minimum and the maximums, which just removes item 8 altogether?
Correct.
The motion was only for the 6 month minimum.
I said to remove the whole rule.
Yeah, but my motion was just to remove the 6 month minimum.
Okay. So another motion that we keep so what I had explained, and maybe we can make a motion on this, that no more than 1 year of the date of issuance for the trainee, that was actually not in the right place, and that should be deleted because it's referenced under the rule for renewal.
Oh, okay.
But we can make a vote to keep it or to remove it.
Well, if that's administrative, I don't know that we need to vote on it, would we? The latter part?
Correct. I think it just comes out because it's somewhere else. So delete that whole thing. So we voted on this. Jamie, do you have more comments about this rule that we've now voted on?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm
Let's
really
limit it to about 1 minute, Jamie.
fine. 1 minute. I'm really concerned that out of the 9 people here, only 3 of us are electrologists, and the 3 of us are going to be the supervisors. And yes, there will be other electrologists that are supervisors, but I believe the people that voted yes for this aren't the ones that are going to be performing the supervisor role, and they don't know all the ins and outs of it. if we have a school, yes, definitely a school can do it in much less than 6 months, but a supervisor cannot. And I'm really upset with the vote because people
okay.
are regulating the industry that don't work in it.
So let me just speak to that really quick. A rules advisory committee is made up to have different views and opinions. That's the whole point of it. And that's why there's a certain number. That's why there's a quorum, and that's why there's a vote. There are actually 4 licensees on the because I believe, Nicole, you're licensed, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so we've got 4. There's nothing that requires to be a majority of electrologists. And I basically, the board gave me direction on what they wanted as far as communities likely to be affected and individuals, and which were transgender, small business, educator, coordinated care organization, health professional, people of color, electrologists, indigenous people, which I didn't get anybody for, low income, veterans, consumers, liability and malpractice insurance, private insurance, professional organizations, senior communities, and prospective electrologists. And I was able to hit all those marks. So, yeah, so that's the whole reason that we have a vote. And there's, and you know, the board may decide that they like the 6-month minimum. We don't know. So this isn't the end all. And then there'll be public comment and there'll be a hearing. So this is definitely not the end all say all. So.
All right.
I think with that said, we will go on to, I'm assuming that the ratio, we're going to carry that from what was up above, which was, let's just go to it. At one time. We were going to add that in to clarify. And we already figured out the temporary trainee and the approved supervisor, which is going to be, there's a primary electrologist. And then number 11 is basically saying, here's all the basic parameters of the program. And then there's another document that gives specificity. So are we okay to move on to 1010? And this rule is a rule that already exists, and it's just a cleanup that we did. So basically, limited basis is usually guest spots. I don't know that we've ever had an electrologist be a temp. We probably have. I just don't know about it. This is standard in standard protocol for HLO. We have it for body piercing, tattooing. So you can work not to exceed 30 calendar days. You can renew 2 times during a 12-month period. So that's just standard. We're just clarifying. And then 9, 10, 15 is just adding the applicant received after the 20th day. Deadline will not be accepted for the office unless otherwise approved, which this situation may be somebody who thought they were going to be there for 2 weeks and then is going to continuously be there for a month. So we obviously wouldn't get their stuff 20 days in advance. The electrology license is telling us who the electrologist is, what they can do. So they perform services defined under 693.65, and they have a license good for 1 year, and becomes inactive the last day of the month from the date of issuance. So 31st day or 30th, sometimes 28th day or 29th of its annual renewal, and then what standards they need to adhere to. So in 91025, this is also a current rule, and it's the pathways to actual licensure. So I aligned the educational institution with how I defined it in definitions. So I guess we'll stop on practical examination, and this is where we can talk through it, not talk through it. So HLO is actually trying to go away from a practical examination. The statute says we just have to approve an exam. It could be written, it could be practical exam, it could be an oral exam, it could be all kinds of things. But as we have it written here is that we would keep the practical examination, and believe that done under examination, we say that it can be at the school or the supervisor level. So if you guys want to discuss HLO moving away from a practical exam altogether or leaving it in and doing it at the school or supervisor level. So it wouldn't be HLO administered, and it would basically be where they're getting their education. So obviously, if you took out the practical, it would be remove barriers.
I would like to move that we accept it either administered by the school or by the supervisor.
And leave that in. So there was a motion. So if there's a second,
I'll second that motion.
I'll call the roll. Where's my roll? Jamie,
Yes.
Sheila,
Yes.
Lacey,
Yes.
Seth,
Yes.
Kate,
Abstain.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla,
Yes.
and Amy.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. All right, so we'll just make sure that this is, that the practical examination. So we voted. Do we have comments about the vote or the rule?
This is Amy.
Sheila?
Just a clarification.
Okay.
It is standardized what the content is of that exam.
Yeah, so I can pull up. We actually have it was sent to you guys. It says practical examination, so there's like minimum objectives that they would have to meet, and then there's a scoring criteria, so they're given tools to ensure that they're giving an accurate practical. I can pull it up.
No, that's enough. Thank you.
Okay.
Can
Sheila,
I just make a comment about the scoring really quickly?
Yes.
One thing that I didn't see on that scoring guide, and if I missed it, please let me know, but what is the duration of the procedure to be scored, or is there like a guideline for how many individual hairs need to be addressed, or what is the metric in terms of duration?
Good question. Can we circle back to that? Serenity is going to look.
Of course.
Okay, great. Sheila, did you have a comment on the rule?
I'd like to go back to something you zipped by. It's in dash 0015B for the temporary licensor to submit proof of current training in bloodborne pathogens. And I know we talked about this at the meeting last year. And I think it's, the more I think about it, I think it's a matter of semantics. Bloodborne pathogens is not referred to in any other section. There's infection control in the continuing education, and in the curriculum for the core curriculum and the training, it would be kind of under microbiology and bacteriology, but it's not required by anybody else. But yes, they're asking for it for the temporary license.
Right,
So
these
it seems like
people who are coming from another state, they may not have licensure.
But wouldn't you check if the training is supposed to be comparable?
No.
Wouldn't have to, if we ask for it and they don't have it,
No, not for this limited basis license.
Okay. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
No problem.
And I know Samantha is looking up about the time frame, but you know, when we did the exams, we usually watched them do the procedure until we were satisfied that we'd seen enough them do enough hair treatments and releases that we got to see enough consistency of the way they worked to know if they were doing well or they were doing not too well. So we didn't have a stopwatch. And so in some cases we knew very quickly how things were going. Others we wanted to give them a little more chance to make changes or be less nervous. And so it could it could go out as long as the proctors felt we had enough to make our judgments.
So there is no objective measurement on when they've hit the mark.
I don't believe that there was. So they may find something. I thought I saw something about a time framework in the, but I don't remember that we really had it, that we used it before, but I think there is something somewhere in here about a time.
So I gotta read it from here. So I can, basically, this is Corinthia. Can you hear me?
Yes,
You guys here, okay.
So what the candidate notice says, and going back, Sheila is exactly correct. The notice that's sent to the candidate, and this would be information that would be sent to the trainer, the supervisor, is the purpose of the practical examination is to determine and verify that the candidate possesses the minimum level of practical and cognitive skills essential for the competent and safe practice of electrology. A license to practice electrology represents a public trust, and candidates who apply for this trust must demonstrate minimum competence. This is the old language, but we'll massage this to put for the supervisor and the school. Each practical examination, candidates are required to demonstrate the skill of epilation on the face, eye, chin, lip, eyebrow, etc. by one of the following modes: galvanic, high frequency, or the blend. The candidate's performance will be tested and rated based on procedure, setup, model preparation, instrument use, aftercare, and post-procedure. The evaluation criteria the proctors use to score the candidate's performance is included, which is what you guys have looked at. So it's not specific in regards to the number of hairs removed as stated by Sheila.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, and of course, I mean, I obviously to defer to what you've been doing on this, I was just curious if it had been addressed somewhere at all.
Yes, sounds like it's addressed in the candidate documentation.
Yeah. Perfect, thanks.
I want to set them in.
Carla, did you have a comment? Carla, did you have a comment? Your hand's up.
We're past my comment.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Unless you guys want to set a minimum number that they would have to show for the practical, or just leave it as a baseline competency, and the supervisor slash teacher would decide when they're competent. Sounds like that's the way we're going to move. Okay. Yeah. Okay, where are we? We are. And so Pat, so now we're on, we got the vote for the practical. We're good there. So pathway 2 is an individual who has a temporary license, a trainee license. So this is the apprenticeship person or trainee person. So they would submit documentation that the agency prescribes, verifies their supervisor and all of that. Submit the passing score of a written, pass the practical, and pay fees, and then they get a license. So that's that pathway. And then anybody have questions about the pathway for training? It's just like the other one. It's just you're going to show us different documentation. And then pathway 3 is your reciprocal pathway. And again, we have a temporary rule in place that since we're talking about it, I'll be filing permanent before it'll become permanent before these become permanent. So since we've talked about it, so let me say this. HLO has broad authority to waive examinations for fields practice in body electrology and body piercing. So for reciprocal licenses, is it necessary for them to have for us to have to see that they passed a practical exam, or is them holding a license in another state enough? So you would actually remove the C and D, remove the written exam and the practical exam, and just they have the license, we're going to give them a license. Lacey.
I would remove all but taking the state law test, because you're coming from one state to another and our laws may vary to another state's laws. So most states, I'm licensed in multiple states, and most states require you to take their state law exam just to make sure, because you're going to be held accountable for that. So if someone's coming from out of state into our state, we require that cosmetology or other ones when you get your license in our state to take that law test. So, I mean, if someone's gonna be held accountable for that law, it'd be nice to make sure that they know the law before they get their license. So
Currently, Electrology doesn't have a laws and rules exam. It would have to be created and maintained. We charge a fee for it in most cases. It's definitely something you guys can recommend to the board. And then once we get there, okay, we would, if they say yes, we would start coming up with that exam, determining if is it going to be, they come in the office, they can do it online at their house. We have different methods that you can take the examination. And then my second question would be, would this laws and rules exam need to be taken by all people? People coming from a school, people coming from a training program, and people coming from reciprocal. Jamie.
I would say that we're talking about reciprocity. I would just say people coming from out of state into our state. And, you know, we also talked about it in our rules, or the previous one to this that came up with these, is that, you know, going forward, that, you know, the people who are already practicing are you know, okay, and then going forward, we would have a laws test, since that was something we've never had before. So before reciprocity, people applying for reciprocity, and for students to be able to take the laws exam.
So usually it would be any new licensee applicant would take the laws and rules exam.
Right.
Not previously licensed. Although if the board could determine, and the agency, that everybody take it and pass it, but that wouldn't be the norm.
There's something about this conversation that feels like we're adding a burden of getting licensed rather than trying to remove barriers. I wonder if this is a conversation for another time.
You are adding a barrier. This is really the only format to have that we have in the office to get people's feedback. Otherwise, we could leave it as is. We could just take out the written and practical and have no other examination, not have a laws and rules exam. You could do it lots of different ways, and we could do different votes. We can do a lot of things. Jamie?
All right. I think we should leave it that if somebody is licensed in another state and we do have reciprocity with them, that they become licensed in our state. On the other hand, it might be very simple to take Oregon rules and regulations, and when you apply for the license, they have to read the rules and just check it off. Just like it says, have you been a felon or something like that? You have to check it off. Well, you'd have to read the rules and just check it off. For everybody.
So it'd be trust-based.
Right. Just to renew your license, that you know what the rules and regulations are.
To renew or when you apply?
Both. When you apply, you would have to read the rules and regulations, And when you renew your license, that you have to go read the rules and regulations again because they change. And this way, the electrologist that's been practicing for 5 years would know what the new rules and regulations are.
So every year you're reading the laws and rules? That's what
Yeah.
you're saying?
Yeah. It only takes 5 minutes.
To read the laws and rules?
Well, just like you would have a test, you're not going to test the whole thing, but those things that have changed or are new, you would have to read them and sign that you read them.
Okay. Carla, did you have a question? A statement?
Not
No? Sheila?
I always assumed that the laws and rules were part of the written exam. So this is enlightening. I really feel that if you've already been licensed, you get all this communication from the staff about the rules revisions. So everybody should have received these, and it'd be our obligation to read them. But I do think they should be, far as someone coming in new, should have to have it. They should be, if they're from out of state, maybe the school should let them know what's happening in Oregon. It could be part of the instruction, and the trainer or supervisor should do that as well. And I would think they would maybe have it included in their packet of information as they apply for their license. I don't know if it has to be written in, but I think it should be covered somewhere so that everybody gets access to it.
Lacey?
I just want to add, I'm not trying to place barriers in front of anybody or stop anybody from getting their license. What I would like to kind of say and have people realize is that the rules regulate a lot of things for safety, for sanitation, for how we run our facilities and what we do. And that we are held, as electrologists, we are held responsible, even financially responsible and legally responsible for knowing those laws. And, you know, most all of us here that own, you know, I have multiple facilities. I've been inspected at one time or another. And when they come in and they inspect you, I mean, they're going through your stuff and they're looking at your stuff and you're expected to know those laws and everything. And I just think I'm not putting a barrier from someone. If anything, I'm trying to open a barrier and allow the students to be able to be qualified, knowledgeable in the areas that they're going to be held legally, financially. I mean, those breaking those rules come with a financial penalty. You can get fined. So, there are fines and things that go along with that. And so, and it's just trying to make sure that somebody knows what they're getting into, what they're responsible for, what they need to do. So they have some sort of eyes wide open knowledge going into becoming an electrologist, that what our state expects from it and the rules that they're going to be held accountable for. So I'm not trying to put barriers. I'm just trying to, one, think safety first, think safety for my patients and everybody else, because those rules cover sanitation and a lot of other things. And also keep other electrologists out there safe and keep their licenses and other things from not getting fines and penalties if they were to get inspected or something to go wrong. So I don't want people to say that I'm putting a barrier when I'm really actually thinking safety. And I'm also thinking about the electrologist that's going to become an electrologist in the state and what they're expected to uphold.
Right.
Thank
So anytime someone gets a license, no matter what the profession, you need to know the laws and rules, and it's what's expected. It's part of the previous rule that you must adhere to standards, and it lists up all the different rule standards, which have all the different safety and infection control. And if you were to add another examination, it would technically be you're adding something, so it then is a new requirement.
Can
So,
this,
and
instead of adding it as an exam, can it not be explicit as an attestation? so that we're not going through an administrative process of adding an examination, but to Lacey's point, for someone to know what they're getting into, the attestation would suggest that the person has reviewed and acknowledges.
We can have an attest on the application.
I like that.
I like it because it doesn't make a governing body like, you know, you don't have to force it. You're offering it, and it's a little less restrictive, so people have choice.
Okay,
in how
so
much they-
let me see if I can summarize this. The vote would be to remove a passing score of a written and practical exam and adding an attestation on the application that the applicant understands and knows the laws and rules governing electrology. So if I could get a motion to that effect.
Wait, I'm not saying get rid of the exam. I'm just saying we're just saying getting rid of the law test. Not the exam, but the law test.
For reciprocity,
Oh, for
what was
reciprocity. Sorry.
about was getting
Yes.
rid of the written and practical.
Right. Yes, I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. I apologize, Sammy.
Okay. So I need a motion.
I move, Lacey Keeney, I move that we remove for reciprocity purposes, we remove the written test and practical test and the law test.
And attestation on the application that they know the
With the
laws and rules.
Yes, I'm sorry, with the, I can't.
That's okay. You
Attestation.
can just say so moved.
So moved.
You don't have
There
to
you go.
repeat me.
I second that. Jamie,
Okay.
Blue.
Let me call the roll. Jamie,
Yes, I agree.
Sheila,
Yes.
Lacey,
Yes.
Seth,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla, 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 are you voting yes or no? You're on mute.
Not my fault. Teams crashed on me. I vote yes.
And Amy.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And I'm just going to throw this out there under the other two pathways. I'll add on there in the application that they would attest to knowing the laws and rules too. So it's consistent for all the applicants. Okay. Moving down to temporary train. Let me just do a time check. Is there anybody have a time limit? Because I don't think it's going to take very much time to go through the next pieces. But we've got about 30 minutes. Does anybody have a time constraint where they have to get off at 1?
I have
I do.
a 1 o'clock.
Okay, so let's try to respect the time and move through this. So a temporary license, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. The temporary trainee is valid for 1 year and may not be renewed. So we do want it to be able to be renewed, correct? One time.
Yes.
So to clarify, they can renew it one time without reapplying, and if they need to renew it a second time, they can reapply and then be granted a new trainee license that way.
That's a second question. So if they apply and then they can renew one time, so that would technically be 2 years.
Yep.
That's up to you guys. Can they reapply after the 2 years? I mean, we have it all different ways. That means they're requalifying. They have to put their supervisor information in. All of the things have to happen again.
Yes.
I think it makes sense to have that as an option.
Okay, it's not limiting. I don't, yeah, it doesn't, I don't know that anybody would ever have to do it, but you never know. COVID, good option. Maybe someone's pregnant. I don't know. Could be lots of things. Number 2, the trainee licensed under 365 may provide electrology services under the direct supervision, which we've defined. We went through that and okayed that. You must have an approved supervisor on site when providing services. I don't think 3 is actually necessary because we've already said it's direct supervision. So we've already said it has to be on site.
Do we need to make a clarification because we've just defined the word direct and indirect?
Oh yeah, you're right. Maybe that's why 3's there.
Well, I was wondering if we should just take may provide electrology services under the supervision of an office approved supervisor, because we've defined supervision style somewhere else.
Good idea.
Oh, so just take out the word direct, leave everything else.
Okay. Do you have me muted? Is anybody not muted? Never mind. Supervisors of a trainee must adhere to, and that goes back to the supervisor rule, which is down below. These are just telling us who this person is. They must work in a licensed facility. Yes, so because your electrologist is a licensee, it has to be a licensed body art facility.
Body art.
What? Temporary trainee, within 10 days, if you make a change in the employment status or supervision. If there's employment status, it doesn't necessarily mean there is. And the trainee must adhere to all the standards, like I said, facility standards, safety standards, everything. And then here are the application requirements that you guys can weigh in on. So submit the form, you gotta be 18, gotta have a high school diploma or equivalent, and you gotta pay the fees. Pretty simple.
Sammy, I don't know where else this might fit, but it was mentioned here. The it was the one up above it, number 5, I think.
Okay.
In a licensed facility, I was noticing in the definition of licensed facility that a medical office wasn't listed. And I know, Amy, you've attempted to try to get trainees or something at your facility, and there was an issue with a medical office not being licensed by the HLO because medical office wasn't listed. Can it be listed?
Thank you for bringing that up, Kate.
Yeah, I think our other clinics have requested that shift as well.
So I think what we would say is because those, well, first let me ask you this. Would a electrologist be working there and supervising?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly, but not necessarily.
I think we have some interest in it. I think Kaiser and OHSU both have some interest in developing training models.
Hold on one second.
Just like.
So I think two things come to mind here. One is if somebody's working under another licensed provider, medicine, nurse practitioner, those people are exempt from licensure. So I'm thinking that there's a way to, and if I'm understanding correctly, to put in here, unless they're under the supervision of somebody who's exempt, and then they wouldn't need to be in a licensed facility.
That's a
so rather than talk about where, talk about who's exempt from being licensed.
Okay. I think that there's statutes about the facility itself of being near running water and such. And so there was, if there can be an exemption for medical offices and say like they meet our criteria already, Amy, please weigh in.
The problem
Yeah,
is that there's no definition for medical office or that I know of that would be consistent throughout. And it would be hard to, unless you know of like a rule that defines medical office, then that I can reference so that people know what we're talking about. Otherwise, we would glean onto an exemption that we already have, assuming that if it wasn't an electrologist, the other piece is that, say, a doctor could be overseeing and delegating work to anybody to perform electrology. They wouldn't have to be an electrologist because they're falling under that exemption of that physician. And the physician's delegating, and anything that happens goes under their license, under the Oregon Medical Board. So it's kind of lots of variables. But I can definitely work on something. So maybe, Amy, were you gonna weigh in?
yeah, if the exemption covers that, then that's adequate, but I'd want to better understand that licensed facility definition again and what's driven by statute.
Okay, so let me tell you. Facility means. What's facility? Facility means a fixed or mobile place of business operated on a regular or irregular basis for the purpose of providing services in one or more field of practice. Tattooing, piercing, earlobe piercing, electrolysis, dermal implanting, and scarification. So if those practices are occurring, they need to be in a licensed facility, but there are exemptions to all of the body art laws, which is under 69360. And then there's a list of them. So 690, all of these do not limit or preclude or otherwise interfere with the practice of other persons or healthcare providers licensed in the state. Doctor, physician, I don't know, naturopath, registered nurse, lots of things could be there. Really. And then subsection, all of these. Yes.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes. This is Bob. Bob's the interim director.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So typically with the facility, we look at the relationship between the medical practitioner and the licensee. If the licensee works for the medical practitioner, then there might be an exemption, but if the licensee is there as a independent contractor, then there would need to be a license for that facility. That's how, when we look at advanced aesthetics or aesthetics, we have medical facilities that do have cosmetology licenses because they work in the facility but are not working for the medical practitioner.
I guess I need to understand better what working for the medical practitioner means.
An employee.
So if I used OHSU as an example, our electrologist is practicing independently as a licensed provider, but not working under someone else's license.
Correct.
So they would likely have to have an electrology facility license.
Correct.
That's how we would interpret that. But
Right.
you're saying.
And the
you want there to be
exemption,
an
the exemption would allow for that not to be required, it sounds like.
Here's what I can do is I can, I don't know if we can legally do that. If the law allows it, I would have to get legal advice on that. So I can do that and then take it to the board and give them the scenario and let them weigh in. But that's kind of, I don't have an answer to that one. Lacey.
I was going to say, we kind of went through this and we really researched it hard because I have a physician here inside of our facility that works with us, but they are contracted and they own their own practice. So, but they are contracted with us, just like kind of like cosmetology, where you rent out like booth rent kind of aspects of it. So what we came up with and what the research that we did, and even having, you know, kind of hiring some legal help with that is that in order for the exemption to work, that I would actually have to be on the payroll being paid and from the physician himself. So the physician would be doing like the billing and other things for my services, and I would then receive a salary in order for me to follow under the exemption and for what I do to be able to fall under his license. But since he is a doctor and I have my own practice and I do my own insurance billing under my own NPI number, which is my National Practitioner's Identification Number, allows me to perform under my own authority. So therefore, my physician inside my office runs his own practice and basically booth rents or rents his space inside my office from my facility, and which requires me to gain a facility license. I've talked to, you know, Michelle Capadona and I both were applying for a contract with Oregon State Prisons, and we were told there also that we would have to have a facility license to be able to practice out of the Oregon State Prison. So because that's how that would be covered, unless we were under the direct supervision and on the payroll of the doctor. And then you're under the payroll of the doctor, then you have to provide, or he or she or they, them, then are responsible under their licensure for anything that you do. So their malpractice insurance also covers that too. So that was what we found when we brought our physician into our facility. And that's all. I mean, I guess there's a lot of legal, you know, roundabouts to go on that. So if you talk all day about it, so.
What I'm hearing is that using your exemption for supervisor is you're trying to establish a supervisory relationship to get the exemption, when in fact, this is probably better solved by expanding the definition of a licensed facility. And I know that's statute, so it's going to be a higher ask.
Right. And I don't think any doctor that's not an electrologist would want to, want to be like, I'll supervise someone who is a student or try to do that. I mean, and a facility license is $200 and some. It's an easy fix just to go get a license and do it the right way, my opinion.
Would you all even allow like Dr. Doogie's office in OHSU to get an electrology licensed facility license?
Yeah, I can get one.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
All right, so if everyone's okay, I'm gonna obviously need to get some legal advice from Heather, who spoke earlier. So I don't have a good answer for this. I will have something for the board. I will send it out to you before it goes to the board, but it'll be just part of the recommendation, and they'll have to decide how they want to move forward. So is everybody okay with? I mean, that's just Carla. Do you have something you want to add? Carla? Carla, do you have something you want to add? You're on mute, Carla. Carla, you're on mute. Okay, we'll come back to Carla if she has comments. Okay, moving on. So, if there's employment change or any kind of change, we need to know within 10 days. That's standard HLO rules under 331 and statute 676. And then again, all the trainee must adhere to all the safety and infection control rules. Was there anybody opposed to the requirements to get a training license? It's pretty basic. You gotta apply, you gotta show us proof of being 18, high school diploma or equivalent, and pay fees. That's just what's in, just what is.
There's need to be something there that says the attestation in the application.
For a trainee?
No.
Okay, so now we're at electrology supervisor, and I want to make sure and be cognizant of the time. So it's 12:46. So electrology supervisor, these are kind of just general practices. An approved supervisor may supervise up to 4 trainees. So I will align this to match what you guys wrote up above. Supervisor must provide direct supervision. So I will also align that to match everything up above. This is just that the supervisor is basically in charge and exercising management, guidance, and control. You must submit documentation that's prescribed by the office, which is your training packet, which is all this paperwork. And then the supervisor needs to have no disciplinary action. And then so this one would need to be aligned with, didn't we have issues with licensed electrologists? Hold on again. Did we say had to be licensed? Yeah, so it has to be licensed electrologist to provide training. I guess there's a question in that. Would there be a scenario where the supervisor would be not a licensee, but they're exempt, like a physician who has experience in electrology, or a registered nurse who is exempt by statute, and they're actually training the trainee, and so they're a supervisor?
I would say no. They would have to be a licensed electrologist.
Okay, so keep it how it is then. Perfect. Where was I? Hold on, I gotta find my place. Lots of moving around. Oh, sorry. Went way past. Let me just send something out. So I would align all this electrology supervisor with all of the decisions you guys made up above. Is there anything you would want to add to this list?
I'm wondering if a supervisor has to be licensed in Oregon and practicing in Oregon.
Well, they'd have to get a temporary license in order just to practice here, so then they would be considered licensed.
So someone from Washington State can apply for a temporary license here to teach?
Yep, but they can only do it for so long. They can only teach for up to, 30 days in a 12-month period, but it can be consecutive. And then they have to become fully licensed if they're doing it past that time.
Sammy, this is Tina. I don't think a temporary would allow them enough time to do the full hours. If it's only 3 consecutive.
I think she's talking about just being a supervisor.
Right. Oh, okay.
So they could maybe come in and do it. I'm misunderstanding. Would the person from out of state be coming in and doing the whole? Well, they just wouldn't be able to unless they got the whole license. The option is have a temporary license on a limited basis, which is a guest spot or an event, being an event, have a temporary trainee, or have a full license. That's what unless we created another temporary license that would go farther than the 30 days.
So in the school rule, you have to be licensed to be a teacher for 2 years. So on a supervisor, is there any minimum criteria in the time you've been an electrologist?
No. Just says you
What
can't have
about
any
body
discipline.
piercing? If you're a trainer in body piercing, is there a limited time? Because all of them are licensed to train.
Right. There's no rule that I know of for body piercing, but I could look it up. I think the question is, could somebody come in from out of state and teach without a license, or do they need to get one? Was that the question?
Yes. An
Okay.
Oregon license.
Right. And as the rules are now, they would need to get a temporary license, good for 30 days, or a regular license if they're going over that. Jamie?
Oregon, Washington is not a licensed state. And I don't think anybody who's not licensed should be allowed to come in and be a supervisor in Oregon. You have no idea what their background is. Now, that's in Washington. Of course, California is licensed. If they're in a licensed state and they want to come in and teach and get a temporary license, that's fine. But I don't think we should let anybody who's not licensed come into our state under a temporary license and teach.
Agreed. Yeah, I have to disagree with that. You've said several times that there's not enough of you to do all of this and we need more people. So I think we need to open the doors, not close them.
No.
But you're talking about somebody teaching who we don't know their credentials. We don't know how good they are. We have no background on them because they're not licensed. And just because somebody's in an unlicensed state and working doesn't mean they meet all the criteria of Oregon State. We know that people that are licensed in California, we have reciprocity with them. We know that they know everything that an Oregon licensed electrologist knows, and I have no problem with that. But I know many people that work in Washington and have been working for a long time who I wouldn't let them do electrolysis on my dog. On the other hand, I know many Washington electrologists that are wonderful and fantastic. They belong to AEA and they have credentials. A lot of them are CPEs, certified professional electrologists, which means they took a national test. And so you know that they have the background to come in. But no, I disagree with you wholeheartedly. You haven't worked in the field.
So just to clarify, anybody that you don't have to have a license to get a temporary license on a limited basis. You just don't. You have to give us a letter saying you have work for 6 months, and hold on, I gotta go up there. So anybody can come in and do that, and unless you wanted to limit people under supervision from only being able to work, I mean, you'd have to say where it says it has to be a licensed electrologist, you'd have to do a carve out and say it wouldn't be inclusive of the limited basis people who are coming in to do a guest spot. Or you could just leave it that it needs to be a licensed person supervising.
I guess if I may, my concern is that somebody might be licensed in a licensed state, but practicing in a state that does not have a licensing. And I'm wondering if those people are allowed to be supervisors or not.
Right, they'd have to come in and get a temporary license, which would then make them a licensee, but they can only do it for 30 days. Once 30 days is up, they'd need to qualify for a regular license.
Okay.
Now, a way around that would be extend the temporary license on a limited basis, which was originally created as for like a guest spot license. Someone just comes up from California to do 2 weeks, take over someone's practice for 2 weeks because they're going on vacation. That's what it was originally intended for. But you could do it for longer. but they would have to be licensed. I mean, I could ask for legal advice on that, but I don't know how you would get around somebody providing services without a license. No matter if they come from a state where there is or isn't a license, they got to get one. It's the whole point of mandatory licensing. So I'm not sure how we would get there. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm not asking if someone can teach without a license. I'm just asking if someone from an unlicensed state who might hold a license in a licensed state, like let's say for instance, I hold a license for California, but I live in Washington State. Can I come into Oregon to teach somebody as a supervisor?
Yes.
Like
you
get
have
the license and teach? Yes.
Okay.
You would qualify for a permanent license based on your license in California.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could start teaching. There's no limit on, or there's no, like, you have to be licensed in Oregon for 2 years. Is that what you're asking? Like, is there a license time? Okay. No, there is no requirement of how long you have to be licensed.
It's more so if I'm practicing in an unlicensed state and I'm not being regulated by that state, how are we to say that somebody that practices in an unlicensed state can come into Oregon and teach? So that does clear it up. They have to have a license in Oregon State in order to teach.
Yes.
Okay.
Sammy?
Lacey?
So when we did the requirement board, I specifically asked that question, and I believe that Cynthia said that it had to be, in order to be qualified as a supervisor, you had to be licensed for 2 years for that to meet the Oregon Board of Education requirement was a 2 years.
Remember, HEC is one thing, supervisors, HLO. Different.
Okay. So, and my other question.
This is Cynthia, and I may have said that because if I'm looking at the body piercing application for a supervisor, and it does say 2 years, but Sammy says that it needs to be specified in rule, which I totally get. So on the application for supervisor for body piercing, it is 2 years. So I'm gonna look up the rules.
Hey, y'all, I know that Amy and I have to go because it's 1 o'clock, so I just wanted to flag the time.
So we can do one of two things. We can schedule another meeting. Would that be, would everybody be okay with that?
How much more was there left to go?
We've got this rule and then the temporary trainee, we did that. Supervisor requirements. Oh, submit proof of actively practicing electrology for the past 2 years. So it doesn't say where. The examination, which just kind of goes more into what the practical is. And then.
So I would support another meeting if we, since it seems like there's.
I think it would be pretty short. I think maybe under 2 hours. So it could be, and we have until September 12th. So we have a little time. So what I'll do is I'll have April send you out some dates of availability, and then we'll, like I said, I think it will be pretty short, and it'll also give me an opportunity to get that legal advice between now and then, so you guys can look at that too. Does that work for everyone?
Yes. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Jamie, everyone okay with?
Yes.
Okay. I will call, let me read my little script. Oh, hold on. Public comment. Is there anybody on the phone? Is there anybody is this the right one? Is there anybody on the public phone line? Anyone? Does the missed calls mean somebody tried to call in and didn't get in?
That would be good.
Okay.
So this one was the one that was on, so do you want me to dial back in? Which phone is this, which one is this one?
I don't know which is which, I know not.
So this is our meeting, so between this calls, people did not.
No, this is from earlier.
Hold on, we're just seeing if there's any public comment. Did it disconnect?
Yeah, because nobody was on.
Please enter the conference PIN and confirm your entry by pushing the pound key. This conference has not yet started. Please wait to enter the moderator. Star N6.
There's nobody on the public phone line, so the Board of Electrologists and Body Art Practitioners Rules Advisory Committee meeting is adjourned at 1:03 p.m. Okay, thanks, guys.